a story about entrepreneurship. So I think I teach in many programs. I teach in undergraduate programs. I teach in master programs. I also teach in the Global Online MBA here at IE. And I think the best way to illustrate a lot of key concepts is by telling stories. So I'll start off with a story about entrepreneurship. And this first story is about Pierre. So Pierre is the guy in the picture on the left. And his passion in life is actually his girlfriend, Pam, as you can see in the picture. Pam's passion in life is not Pierre, even though she loves him very much. Her passion is collecting Pez containers. So I don't know if you know what they are. They're Pez dispensers. They're these candy dispensers. They're actually available all over the world. So wherever you are and connecting to this lecture, you've probably heard of these candy dispensers called Pez. And so Pam's passion was collecting these candy dispensers. She had a very, very big collection, as you can see. And this story takes place in the 90s in the US. And I think a lot of you are either connecting from the US or are from the United States. So you're probably going to be very familiar with the idea of a yard sale or a garage sale. So back in the 90s, the way Pam would look for her Pez dispensers or Pez containers was she would go to yard sales with Pierre every weekend. And sometimes she'd find one and sometimes she wouldn't. And sometimes she'd find one she already had. It was extremely inefficient. And so Pierre got tired of these yard sales or garage sales. And he thought, okay, there has to be a more efficient way of connecting people who are selling Pez dispensers to Pam. And so he had an idea. He saw that there was this opportunity and there was a market inefficiency. So can anyone jump in and maybe unmute your mic and tell me, what do you think Pierre's idea was? And again, this is a story of entrepreneurship. Anyone want to jump in? Just unmute your mic, because if you put it in the chat, I probably won't see it.
Was it eBay?
Exactly. Was this you, Joey?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. His idea was eBay. So Pierre Omidyar is the founder of eBay. And so he realized that there was a way to harness the power of the internet and put sellers and buyers in touch. And he became extremely successful. And the rest is pretty much history. I don't know if he actually managed to buy the Pez dispenser factories, and so that his beloved Pam and now wife could be the owner of all the Pez dispensers in the world. But what we do know is that the first thing he ever sold on eBay was a broken typewriter. And why would he sell a broken typewriter? Anyone? What do you guys think? And again, you can unmute your mics. Just jump in.
Because he thought that someone might be able to fix it.
Fix it, or was it to fix it or what? Or to collect it, right? So the same way that Pam was collecting Pez dispensers and trying to find them secondhand on eBay, the first person who ever bought something on eBay was a broken typewriter, because he or she was actually a collector and didn't mind that it was broken. And the first employee at eBay was someone called Jeff Skoll, who also became extremely successful thanks to eBay. So he was one of the first employees and shareholders, and then went on to become a very successful entrepreneur, businessman, also producer of movies, and his name is Jeff Skoll. And he's also the founder of the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Oxford University. And every year he awards different social entrepreneurs in the world the Jeff Skoll Award. But I'll get back to him later. So it kind of does come full circle. So this is a happy story about entrepreneurship. Here's a second story for you. So this story is about Shafi. Shafi Mathur is based in Mumbai, India. Anyone from India in the group or based in India? Just say hey or hi, unmute your mics. Maybe not. Okay. We actually have a lot of Indian students at IE University. So Shafi Mathur, so this is a story about entrepreneurship, slightly different. So unfortunately, Shafi Mathur's had a heart attack in Mumbai. And so they called an ambulance, and unfortunately the ambulance got stuck in traffic and Shafi's mother passed away. So of course he was devastated, and he thought, I don't want this to ever happen again. I'm not going to solve the problem of traffic in Mumbai in India, but maybe I can do something about the fact that the ambulance didn't make it in time, because, you know, having a heart attack doesn't mean that you automatically die. With the right medical attention, you can actually survive and make it to the hospital and get the right attention. And so what he decided to do was to create an ambulance service called 1298. And so I don't know if anyone is from India in the group and didn't say, but there is no equivalent of a 911 or a 999 if you're in the UK, or a 112 if you're in Spain. So this free number that you call to get an ambulance in case of an emergency. So he decided to come up with his a version of 911, and it was called 1298. And these were yellow ambulances that had life-saving equipment on board, and also a doctor on board, in order to keep you alive until you got to the hospital. So what made this service different was, first of all, in India at the time, and still now, there was no 911 number. So this is something that he offered. This is something that the government should have offered, and that he ended up doing because it was not being offered by the government. And he did want to make this universal. He wanted this to be a service that was accessible to all. So what he decided to do, even though he was, you know, a private entrepreneur, he didn't have the resources to make it free. So what he did is he said, okay, if you can afford it, you have to pay for the service when you call the ambulance. But if you can't afford it, it will be free. So how do you think he would know how much to charge somebody? Would it be an honor code? Or would it be, how would he know? Anyone, any idea? How would he know how to charge somebody? Whether to charge full price or just free if they can't afford it?
Zip code, maybe?
Zip code, so meaning where they live in Mumbai. Okay, yeah, that could be a way. So if they're calling from a poor area or a slum, it would be free. And if they're calling from a more upscale area, it would be full price. But what if they're calling not necessarily from where they live? How would you know how much to charge? Anyone? Any idea? Well, they would know by whether or not the patient had insurance. Okay, so in India, if you have health insurance, you don't go to the public hospital, you go to the private clinic, because you're going to be probably seen by a doctor much faster than if you go to the public hospital, where the line at the ER is probably extremely long. So that would be an easy way. If you have health insurance, your health insurance can pay for the ambulance and they will take you to a private clinic. If you don't have health insurance, then you'll probably be taken to the public hospital, and it probably means that you can't afford this service, so it would be free. So 1298 has since grown tremendously. Oh, I see a question. So if you have questions, just jump in, interrupt me, no problem. Unmute.
Sorry, Derek here, Houston, Texas. I'm curious to know, so was this a question that he asked as the person was calling for emergency care, or was it not till after they received the care, then they would verify and then dictate a price?
As they called. So he would ask, okay, do you have health insurance? Yes. Okay, we will charge you for this. And if you don't have health insurance, it'll be free. And so the service has actually grown tremendously. It's now called Zikitsa. It's the largest emergency healthcare provider in India. It has now teamed up with, as you can see some numbers here, it's not all over India yet. It's in 16 states. It has 3,000 ambulances, and it has actually teamed up with the government. So this is initially a service that should have been offered by the government. And so Shafi stepped in, and now he's teamed up with the government, and he's got different numbers. So 108, which is just a hotline, a helpline in case of, accidental poisoning, for instance. You get, and this is free. 102 is also free. It's free transfer for pregnant women and infants to the hospital. And 1298 is the same number that he originally created. And that is still, that you still have to pay for if you can afford it, and it's free for those who can't. Okay, so I'll just keep these two stories in mind. Sometimes students ask me, yeah, but I mean, these ambulances are going to get stuck in traffic too. So how is he solving a problem? Well, yes and no, because the fact that they're yellow and that he has such a huge fleet of ambulances means that there's a higher probability that they're close enough to get to you. And also they are yellow and they have this red number on it, and people recognize them and actually give way when they, so that they can get to the hospital faster. So in this way, he could beat traffic, not completely, but certainly improve, a huge improvement compared to what there was before. Before, it was essentially these white vans, you would call, that would just pick up the corpse and take it to the morgue. It wasn't really an ambulance to speak of. Okay, so I'll come back to these two stories, keep them in mind. And so now I'm just gonna briefly cover what entrepreneurship is. I guess you are all either business students or business graduates, so you will know this. But just very quickly, just as a reminder or a refresher, what is entrepreneurship? Can anyone give me a definition? Very quick and easy. And again, there's no single definition of entrepreneurship. Anyone?
Like stakeholder value.
What did you say? Stakeholder value?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
Owner of a value proposition.
Okay. So value proposition. Good. Anything else?
Like creating a business to solve a problem.
Okay. Creating a business to solve a problem. Okay. So we're creating value. We're creating social value. We're creating a business to solve a problem. Anything else? Any dimension we might be missing? When you're starting
thinks the burden of risk is primarily on the entrepreneur themselves, and so financial risk.
Absolutely, there's definitely risk. This is never guaranteed. Success is never guaranteed. We always talk about the success stories like Pyramidiar or Mark Zuckerberg, but there's a huge element of risk, and you also have to put your own savings, risk your money in order to make what? What is the goal?
Make a profit.
Make profit.
Exactly, to make a profit. So you're doing this for the money, even if a lot of entrepreneurs, and we might have entrepreneurs in the room, might say, you know, I'm not motivated by money. I'm motivated by this vision I have and this need and you know, this opportunity. There is a profit motive and a profit driver, and that's absolutely fine. So here are different definitions. Schumpeter said that, you know, the function of entrepreneurs is to reform or revolutionize the pattern of production. So there's this element of innovation. Peter Drucker said that, you know, the entrepreneur always searches for change, responds to it, and exploits it as an opportunity. So you're opportunity oriented, just like Pierre, you look for this chance to use the carpe diem opportunity. And here you have a very simple definition: a person who starts a business and is willing to risk loss in order to make money. So there's that element of risk and that element of profitability. Okay. So if you look at this, the spectrum here, on one side you have profit maximization, and on the other side you have pure charity. Basically, you don't get any money back, you don't maximize your profit, but you do get a lot in return. It's just not financial reward, it could be social. And so usually when you think of entrepreneurship, you think of it on this side of the spectrum, profit maximization. Okay, so what is social entrepreneurship? And how does it differ from entrepreneurship, or is it the same thing? Anyone? Maybe we have a social entrepreneur in the room. Anybody?
Is it basically starting I'll call it a business that not only makes money, but also does good in the world?
Okay, so starting a business that makes money, but does good in the world. Okay, anyone else want to add to that?
Maybe like the ESG concept, environment, social, and governance.
And governance. Okay, so maybe adopt the ESG concept, but nowadays almost all companies need to, right? So that wouldn't necessarily make them social enterprises. So what makes a social enterprise different? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Address one or more of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
address one of the sustainable development goals. Okay, that could be. Anyone else?
Solving a social problem.
Solving a social or a environmental problem. You can still be a social entrepreneur and focus on the environment. So basically, and again, I'm going to share my slides in a second. Oh, yes, go ahead, Shifa. Oh, Glory, go ahead.
A change agent, someone that uses business to bring positive change in society.
Okay, very good. Exactly. So the main difference between a social entrepreneur and a business entrepreneur or commercial entrepreneur is that is really their motive, their objective. So a social entrepreneur's main objective is not necessarily to make money, even though that is needed. It's to have maximized social impact, or as you said, positive impact on society. So a social entrepreneur will try to solve a social or environmental problem, harnessing the power of business. So they will use business tools, the same entrepreneurial tools that a regular entrepreneur would use, but in order to solve a social or environmental problem, whereas a regular entrepreneur might not necessarily have that objective. They won't necessarily have the social impact objective. And so in the case of the social entrepreneur, social impact is more important than making money. So it's just a question of priorities, and the main driver is social as opposed to financial. So social entrepreneurship is about recognizing social problems and achieving a social change by employing entrepreneurial principles, processes, and operations, initiatives that attempt to address social or environmental issues, problems through market-based solutions and are not totally dependent on funding and grants. Again, this is a little bit beyond this class, but social enterprises can be for-profit or non-profit. But they do want to at least break even. So the idea is for them to break even and be sustainable, at least financially, and if possible, even profitable. But that may not necessarily always be their number one goal. Okay, so here's a long definition. You don't need to read all of it, but I wanted to highlight it because it's by the Ashoka Foundation, and maybe some of you might have heard of Ashoka. Ashoka is this fantastic nonprofit that scouts the world looking for social entrepreneurs. And what they do is they give them seed money. They finance them as long as they already have a proven track record and this ability, or at least potential, to scale up. So here you see, while a business entrepreneur might create entirely new industries, a social entrepreneur develops innovative solutions to social problems and then implements them on a large scale. Because unfortunately in the world, we have social problems that affect millions and millions of people. So the idea is to create a social enterprise that has the potential to change the lives of millions of people in the world. Okay, so the social entrepreneur or the social enterprise falls right in the middle of this spectrum. So here you see where they fall right between profit maximization and pure charity. So we tend to think that doing well financially and doing good, as in social good, are mutually exclusive, but they actually are not. And this is the space that we're going to look at together in this very brief lecture, where you can see that the social entrepreneur operates where profits and good overlap. So doing well and doing good at the same time. That's the space in which they operate. And it's the space that we tend not to talk about very much at business school. This is somewhat changing, but I don't know if any of you have had a social entrepreneurship class, but my guess would be not many, and might not be core curriculum. Okay, so let's go back to my first two examples, Shafi and Pierre. And so of the two, who is the social entrepreneur? Are they both social entrepreneurs? Are they both entrepreneurs? Is one a social entrepreneur and one not? I'm curious to see what you think. So, feel free to unmute your mic and jump in. And there's no right or wrong answer. And I've asked this question many times in class, and I always get very different answers. So if you don't agree, that's perfectly fine. Anyone? Who's the social entrepreneur? Are they both social entrepreneurs? What are they? Are they both entrepreneurs? Anyone? No?
Well, I would say Shafi is definitely a social entrepreneur. I mean, he does good for society. He solves a social problem. He provides emergency care. And then the other one, what was his name? Peter?
Pierre Midyar, the founder of eBay.
Yes, exactly. It depends on what your definition is. Benefiting society, maybe. I mean, trading, like it helps people trade and make money easier, and maybe, I don't know, get rid of their old household to be in a better position to start a new household, for example. So that could be positive change within a society, but not in the same sense as Shafi did.
Okay, anyone else? Do you all
Yeah.
agree with Sina?
I would say Shafi for sure. And I would say on the eBay example, I think there was potential for social entrepreneurship if they were actually, for example, they could be promoting reuse and keeping things out of landfills, and that could be very good if it was
Yeah.
core to their strategy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be so. So I think it's a missed opportunity to be a social entrepreneur versus being one.
Okay, that's a great answer. And Gerald, why is Shafi for sure social entrepreneurship as social entrepreneur, as you say?
Well, because his product, if you will, is about it's saving lives, it's providing a social of value to society that could or should be done by somewhere else, but it's not being done. So he's figuring out a way to do it, and where he can, he's making it available for free. So he's clearly not motivated for profit. He's motivated to just make enough profit to provide his service.
Okay, great. That's a great answer. I'll get back to you in a second because I see that Kirk raised his hand. So do you want to share your thoughts, Kirk?
Yeah, I don't think with the information you provided, either of them are social entrepreneurs.
Okay.
When we define social entrepreneur, we talked about the focus on improving a social problem and having that as the focus of your business and the main strategy over maximizing profit. And what you described are two businessmen who have a social component to their business. But I didn't hear anything about a theory of change model or how they're measuring their impact and how they're able to say that they have made that positive social impact, or that that's their number one focus.
Okay. Wow, that's a very good question. Good question or good comment. Okay. Fantastic. So as you can see, we get very different, well, not very different, but somewhat nuanced answers. And I would say that, again, you're very right. I didn't give you that much information on their backgrounds because that would go beyond the scope of this very short lecture. But based on just what I said, I would agree with Gerald that Shafi is a social entrepreneur, and also Sina, who said that he was a social entrepreneur, and that Pierre was not a social entrepreneur, even though there would be potential to be. So the question really is your motivation and your driver. If your business was built from scratch, from the beginning, with the purpose of achieving social impact or not. And so in the case of Shafi, he's a social entrepreneur, not necessarily because he's saving lives, because then all hospitals would be social enterprises. Hospitals are in the business, especially private hospitals are in the business of saving lives. And that does not make them social. My mother was here in Madrid, and unfortunately she got sick, and we took her to a hospital near our house. And the first thing they asked was whether or not her insurance would cover her stay, because she lives in the Philippines and she has international insurance. And then her insurance was not compatible with the first hospital we took her to. And so they didn't take her in. And so had they been a social enterprise, they would have taken her in, because they would have first wanted to address her need and then see how it was paid. And so then we took her to another hospital, and then of course her insurance was taken, and then it was fine. So it's not the fact that he's saving lives. It's the fact, as you said, Gerald, that he's willing to make less of a profit in order to access or have an impact or a positive impact on more people. So he wants to offer this service to everyone in the city, rich or poor. And that's what makes him a social entrepreneur. And Pierre Midyar didn't have as an initial motivation this social impact. And the fact that maybe it has a positive impact on society. And yes, there's this potential for circular economy, especially nowadays. But when it was founded, there was no intention of that. It was maybe sort of a externality, a positive externality or positive byproduct that you were recycling things. But that wasn't the main objective of his company. Okay, so just very quickly, again, I'm checking time because I only have a half hour left. For those of you who are interested in the social sector, you don't necessarily have to become a social entrepreneur. And I'll give you examples of other social entrepreneurs in a second, examples from all over the world. But there's many ways of getting involved in this sector. And you can be involved from the 100% for-profit side all the way to the nonprofit NGO side. So can anyone give me an example of a for-profit company that actually does social good on the side? Obviously, it's not their core business, and it would certainly not prevent them from maximizing profits. Anybody?
Warby Parker.
Okay.
Warby Parker. Okay, so does everyone know Warby Parker? And what does Warby Parker do?
They sell glasses, and I believe that when you buy some glasses, somehow they give glasses away to folks. I think that's part of their core business model.
Okay, yeah, that's true. So Warby Parker sells glasses. They sell affordable glasses. They're not necessarily, they're not very cheap either. And it's true that they have this model of giving away a pair of glasses to someone in need in the developing world. And they work with a nonprofit called Vision Spring. And this is their partner. And they've actually given away, I think, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of glasses. And so, yes, that's a very good example of a for-profit company with a social overlay. So actually, I would put Warby Parker on the second, just not, a little bit more social than the 100% for-profit ones. Can anyone give me an example of a for-profit company that's, the first one to the left, where they actually do social good, but it's certainly not really associated with their image, and it certainly doesn't prevent them from maximizing their margin?
Unilever.
Okay, and what does Unilever do? That's
They
social.
have some hair care products and other body care products, and they push for sustainability.
Okay,
water
so
usage.
more on the sustainability front. Okay, good. Okay, anything else? Any other company?
Okay, Andela is an African company. It's a platform like Fiverr that matches African unemployed youths in Africa to American companies seeking their skills. So they're a unicorn. They made a lot of money. They're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but they also solve the problem of poverty in Africa and unemployment. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, good example. Any other example? So the one I had was Coca-Cola, and you would never associate Coca-Cola with social good. And this is the Coca-Cola Foundation. So a lot of large corporations have foundations. And so they give parts of their profits to the foundation, and the foundation can then fund different social projects around the world. So here, Coca-Cola has given over $1 billion since 1984. $41 million in empowering women, $408 million in enhancing communities, 216 protecting the environment, and 335 million educating scholars. So this is an example of social good that a for-profit multinational company does. And this you don't necessarily associate with Coca-Cola, but they do good, social good as well, but certainly doesn't affect their profits. This is all money that they just decide to donate once they've actually earned the profits. So that's an example. In for-profit with social overlay, I agree that Warby Parker fits very nicely in this category. Does anyone have any other examples? So here we're moving along on this spectrum, and we're looking at companies that that have social projects or initiatives that are much more closely associated with their image, but still are not social enterprises. They're still much more focused on profit than social impact. Any examples?
I would say the clothing brand Patagonia. I think they are committed to 1% of their revenue to grassroots small scale projects to help save the planet.
Okay, that's a fantastic example, and it's also one that I highlighted. So I'll share the details in a second. It's my next slide. Perfect. Anyone else? So other than Patagonia, has anyone ever heard of this one? This company, Tom's? Tom's is they're very famous for the buy one pair of shoes, give one pair of shoes away. Has anyone heard of them? I'm sure someone in the room has.
My wife's favorite shoes.
Oh, really? Okay, there you go. And so Tom's became very well known because, and here you can see they're the original one-for-one company. So their community has given almost 100 million shoes to people in need. The idea was to buy a pair of shoes and then they would give a pair away to someone in need in an emerging economy. And so you see here this little girl who's wearing Tom's shoes. And so this worked really well, but then they realized that this was probably not enough. And what's interesting is this is an example of a company that started probably, I would say, between for-profit and for-profit with social overlay, and they've been moving around on the spectrum. And I think they're close to becoming a social enterprise, maybe not just yet, but they've decided to give even more. And so here you see for every $3 we make, we give $1 away. And that's a lot of money. For every $3 in revenues, actually, no, here's, sorry, not revenues, annual profits. We'll dedicate at least 1/3 of our net annual profits to a giving fund. 1/3 of annual profits. Most people think, okay, well, even 1% is a lot. And here we're looking at 33% of their net annual profits are given away. And so they've realized that giving shoes was a good thing, but probably not enough because, you know, in a year from now, this little girl will not be wearing shoes again. She'll be back to being barefoot. And, you know, Tom's hasn't committed to giving her shoes for life. They just give her one pair of shoes and then they move on. So they realized that it was probably not enough and that they could do much more. So this is an example of a company that is moving along on the spectrum. The other example I have is Patagonia. So Patagonia, one of you, I think it was Derek, gave the example. So they're world famous for, at least now they were actually in the news a few months ago, because initially they pledged 1% of sales or 10% of pre-tax profits. So 10% of pre-tax profits is still extremely generous. And this was all to environmental groups. So Patagonia has a very environmental focus. And then they decided to go one step further. And the founder of Patagonia decided to give his company away. And he decided to give it away to a nonprofit foundation. So it's a very interesting business model and actually unique business model, a nonprofit foundation that is the owner of Patagonia. So Patagonia is still a for-profit company. They sell clothes. Patagonia clothes are expensive, but they have, you know, they try to minimize the environmental footprint. So they try to minimize the use of water, of chemicals. They're very conscious of the way they produce the clothes, but they're still expensive and they're still certainly for profit. This said, Patagonia is now currently owned by a nonprofit foundation that then takes the 100 million annual profits of Patagonia and invests them 100% in fighting climate change. So this is a very, very interesting model that actually defies anything else that's been done before. And I would just say that they've also moved significantly towards the social good as opposed to profit model. And so just for the sake of time, I'm just quickly moving on. So 1298 would be a hybrid because he does charge, so he has to make some money, but he doesn't charge everybody. So he's making less profits than he could. And so he's not trying to maximize profits, he's trying to maximize social impact. Then if you move along, nonprofit with mission related enterprise, that would be Oxfam, a nonprofit, an NGO that might have a store that sells whatever they sell in the store will go back to all the social good they do, the donations, the poverty eradication programs they have all over the world. And then nonprofit without any revenue generation other than just 100% donation based. Anyone like you and me can donate to save the children. And then they do a lot of good all over the world and to try to help address the needs of children in need all over. Okay, so going back to social, so this was just a very long parenthesis to show you that there are many ways in which, you know, you can actually be part of the social sector without necessarily being a social entrepreneur yourself. So just quickly going back. Oh, sorry, there's a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Where does microfinance fall? on the spectrum?
So microfinance is often very much associated with social entrepreneurship, because a lot of times microfinance helps social entrepreneurs either fund themselves or help social entrepreneurs' clients buy the goods that are being sold to them. Okay, so microfinance is definitely very closely associated with social entrepreneurship. They are for-profit companies, and it is an unregulated sector. So sometimes there has been some criticism of microfinance institutions because, you know, they charge high interest. So they're not necessarily social enterprises, but they operate in the same I guess, space that social entrepreneurs do. And a lot of social entrepreneurs will team up with microfinance institutions to help their clients afford their goods. So a very quick example is EnviroFit is a social enterprise that sells clean cook stoves to poor segments of society in different parts of the world, for instance, in India. And what EnviroFit will do is team up with a microfinance organization like the Grameen Bank. I'll be talking about it again in a second. And then the microfinance institutions lends the money to the person who can then buy the cook stove that is clean and does not pollute and fights indoor air pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the model, but I'll get back to it in a second. That's a good question. Okay, so characteristics of social entrepreneurs. They're innovators, they see opportunities, not problems. They often lack resources, but that doesn't prevent them from undertaking their project. They're not traditional, they're very practical. So it's about their social mission, it's not about money. Success is measured by social impact more than profitability. They're change agents. I believe one of you had mentioned change agents at the beginning. They try to attack the root cause of a problem. They try to reform society. And of course, they try to maximize their reach and impact by reaching as many people as possible. How do they differ from philanthropists or business entrepreneurs? Well, business entrepreneurs will look for the highest possible price that they can charge, or at least the highest possible margin. So they'll try to produce cheap and sell expensive. They'll also look at what the competition's doing. Social entrepreneurs are not so worried about the price. If anything, they're going to try to produce as cheaply as possible and charge as low as possible, because many times they target people who don't have a high income. They target those that are usually excluded by business entrepreneurs. So they don't have this profit driver or motivation. Of course, they want to be break even or sustainable, but it doesn't matter if they're making as big a margin as they could. That's not their driver, their objective. And philanthropists are kind of in the middle. They're considered to be the good guys. They're usually business entrepreneurs or heirs who have made a lot of money and who decide to give away a sizable part of it to do good. And so they're very different from social entrepreneurs in the sense that social entrepreneurs set up a business in order to do social good, whereas a philanthropist will set up a business, sell it, make a lot of money, and then do good. And one is not better than the other. They're just different approaches of helping society. More differences between social entrepreneurs and traditional entrepreneurs. So business entrepreneurs are constrained by the rules of the market. So if they go bankrupt, then they're going to be weeded out. Whereas a social entrepreneur doesn't need to be profitable in order to stay in the market. They just have a longer time. Investors will be more patient, what we call patient capital. They understand that it's going to take a long time for them to break even. So there's less pressure for them to make it. Social entrepreneurs work at the market fringe, and they enter the space where social and economic needs are enormous, but risks are very high and profits are low. And so this is usually a very big deterrent for regular business. Business doesn't want high risk and low profit, whereas social entrepreneurs are not deterred by it. They enter the scene where markets don't provide the certain goods and services because the markets think that there's not enough profitability and there's just too much risk. And also governments lack capacity and resources. For instance, Shafi came in because the government was not providing this free ambulance service. And so he decided to step in, and the market was not providing it either, at least not to the people that he was targeting, meaning the ones who couldn't afford it. And they also very much work with those that traditional business ignore, the poor and socially excluded. So traditional business, and again, this is changing, I'm generalizing here, but often have in the past at least ignored those who couldn't afford certain services. So social entrepreneurs will create products and services that are specifically designed for low income communities. They'll also target socially excluded, such as people with maybe a drug addiction or past convicts who can't get a job. A lot of social entrepreneurs will create a business in order to hire them and give them a job. So they are specifically targeting those that are generally excluded by others. And so they'll also work with people with disabilities. Over 70%, and this is in the developed world, of people with disabilities do not have a job. And so in the developing or emerging markets, this is much, much higher because people think that they are not capable of working if they're blind or deaf or have a disability. And of course, this is not true, not the case. And a lot of social entrepreneurs specifically target people with disabilities in order to give them a chance, in order to empower them and help them lead a life of dignity. And lastly, if things don't go well, business entrepreneurs can pick up and leave, but not social entrepreneurs. Okay, social entrepreneurs are going to be very, very committed. So this is Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka. He's a fantastic social entrepreneur. I had mentioned Ashoka at the beginning. They're the ones that scout the world looking for social entrepreneurs and to fund them. Social entrepreneurs are not content just to give a fish or teach how to fish. They will not rest until they have revolutionized the fishing industry. So before I wrap up and give you a few examples of social entrepreneurs, I'm just going to quickly see how they're connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you're all familiar with the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, and the social entrepreneurs are very much connected to this SDGs, but it's not just social entrepreneurs. All companies and all countries have now committed to at least strive to achieve these goals by 2030. They were preceded by the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, that were created at the UN in 2000. This, at the time, was the largest anti-poverty push in history. At the time, they only had 8 goals, and I'll show you what they were in a second. And the idea was to achieve these 8 goals by 2015, only in emerging markets in the developing world. So these were the 8 goals, the 8 original goals. And they were somewhat achieved, not completely, and it really depended on the country. In some countries, yes, these goals were achieved, and in many others, they were not. And what they realized is that these goals fell short and that needed to be much more ambitious. And so they created the SDGs in 2015 with a 2030 deadline. And so these were 17 goals with 169 very measurable targets. They were much more comprehensive. And as you can see from the 17 goals, I'm not going to go through them because, again, for lack of time, and you're probably very familiar with them already, but a lot of them were very much linked to the environment, much more so than in 2015. In 15, only one of the 8 goals was about the environment. Whereas now we've got life below water, climate action, life on land, affordable clean energy, clean water and sanitation, et cetera, responsible consumption, circular economy. What we see is that they're all very much interconnected, and they're very much interconnected with the planet and making sure that we maintain the sustainable development so that all future generations can live in the same way we did without plundering the planet. One thing that you have to just bear in mind is that these goals were for everyone, so not just developing economies. Every single country, including Norway, Iceland, highly developed economies, have to achieve these goals because no single country has yet achieved them 100%. And again, with much more of a focus on saving the planet and peace building, because if there is no peace, then there is no way you're going to have shared prosperity for everyone. You need stability, a stable political environment in order to then build upon it and worry about the economy and social goals and the environment. Okay, so again, in the few minutes we have left, I'm gonna give you a few real examples of social entrepreneurs that are changing lives. And one thing I like to say to my students is if you add Bill Gates and you mix him up with Mother Teresa, then you have my first example, Cristobal Colon, who's a Spanish social entrepreneur. A lot of social entrepreneurs operate in the developing world, but not exclusively. You have social entrepreneurs everywhere. And so my first example is Cristobal Colon. So I don't know if some of you speak Spanish in the group, but it's a funny name because his name is Christopher Columbus. That's his real name. And he's a Spanish social entrepreneur. And one thing I do want to highlight is that a lot of social entrepreneurs are not necessarily businessmen or women or entrepreneurial from the beginning. They usually have another vocation or another profession. And Cristobal Colon is actually a psychologist. And so this story takes place in the 80s in Spain. And Cristobal worked with people with mental illnesses, mental disabilities. And what he realized is that with the right medication, they were absolutely able to work. Unfortunately, none of his patients had a job because precisely what I had just said a few minutes ago, that a lot of people with disabilities are just not hired by companies. They just don't think that they're fit to work when they actually are. And so he decided to approach the government because a lot of times these social projects are done by government. And he said, my name is Cristobal Colon. My name is Christopher Columbus. I am a psychologist. These are my patients. I would like you to help them and give them a job because they need to have a right to work and a right to earn an income and not just necessarily live off welfare or their families and what happens if they don't have families. And so the government at the time, it was a local councilman said, I'm sorry, you sound as crazy as your patients. Your name is Christopher Columbus. I am not going to give your patients a job. I'm really sorry. You're going to just have to figure that one out on your own, or maybe just stick to being a psychologist. He was angered by the government's reaction, but undeterred. And he said, okay, they're not going to give my patients a job. I will. And so this is an example of a psychologist who decided to set up a company in order to hire his patients. So he decided to target the socially excluded and harness the power of business in order to do so. And the company he created is called La Faeda. It's the third largest yogurt producer in Spain. So I'm not going to get into how he got into yogurt production. It's a long story. He has annual revenues of $15 million, 307 employees, of which half of them are his patients with mental disorders. And they're the ones that actually produce the yogurt. And it's delicious yogurt. I've had it many times. And he's become a success story. And so much so that a lot of people invite him for talks. I invited him personally to come and give a talk at IE University. He is such an inspirational, humble person. And when he introduces himself, he doesn't say, I'm a social entrepreneur, because most social entrepreneurs don't even know the label. He just introduces himself as Cristobal Colon, psychologist who decided to set up a company, La Faeda. And, you know, Danone and Nestle tried to buy him out. And he said, that's not what I'm here for. I don't want to be sold to a large company and then you lose the spirit. You probably would fire all my employees because it probably costs more to have, you know, maybe a framework or support for them to be able to work. But he said that defeats the purpose. The whole purpose is to give them a decent work and dignity and reduced inequality. So how does he achieve the SDGs? Well, here you see that he achieves SDG 10 and SDG 8. This is his impact page. So a lot of social enterprises have impact pages. They look at, you know, the social dimensions of their success, obviously financial and environmental dimension. My next example is Nilu. So Nilu is from Sri Lanka. She has a fantastic story. I teach a case study on her. She was sent as a house cleaner from Sri Lanka. She was sent to Singapore to work as a cleaner. And when she was just a teenager, and she was very fortunate to have an employer that quickly saw her potential and said that, you know, she could do much more than just clean their home. They put her through night school and then sent her back to Sri Lanka, and she started a tea business, a premium tea business. And she's the first woman entrepreneur to own and operate a premium tea business in Sri Lanka. And 10% of all her profits go to Emerging Hope Lanka, a microfinance organization that she has created to empower and educate very small entrepreneurs or micro businesses in Sri Lanka. All of them are women. So this is a good example. I think one of you had a question about whether or not microfinance can be related to social entrepreneurship. This is an example of how this microfinance organization is absolutely related to social entrepreneurship and to fund and helping empower and educate women in Sri Lanka. And so these are the different SDGs she targets. So reduced inequalities, no poverty, decent work, economic growth, et cetera, et cetera. My next example, and again, just checking the time, so I have 5 more minutes, is Lufefe Nomjana. He's a South African. His story is fantastic too. I also teach a case study on him in one of my classes. He's a social entrepreneur. So what he does is he comes from one of the townships. So if any of you are familiar with South Africa, townships are very poor areas in South African cities. And what he decided to do is he realized that, and through just research of his own, that spinach was a superfood. And he thought, well, in the neighborhood where I grew up, the township, the slum, people are not well nourished and they lack access to healthy food. And he thought, okay, I'm going to grow this spinach and turn it into bread and maybe smoothies and muffins and sell it in my township. And the people who will grow the spinach will be women, because women tend to have less access to work. So he was checking a lot of these SDG boxes, reduced inequalities, gender equality, decent work, economic growth, nutrition, healthy living, et cetera, et cetera. And he started off with just $2 in his pocket. And the way he started his first business is really incredible. He did it through a crowdfunding exercise. He just decided to, use his phone, tape a video, put it out on the internet and said, my name is Lufefe Nomjana. I want to start a business selling spinach bread in the township. Will you help me? Will you help fund me? And he raised $2,000, and that's how he started his first bakery. So it's a fantastic story. Now he has 5 stores. And, a lot of entrepreneurs are small time entrepreneurs at first. And maybe they never grow. You're never going to meet a social entrepreneur that is the equivalent of a Pierre Omidyar. That's not their ambition. Their ambition is just to help their communities and hopefully be replicated in other parts of the world. And my last example is probably the most famous social entrepreneur. And I just want to I want to ask the group if anyone recognizes him. He's the most famous one, but if no, who? Sorry.
Muhammad Yunus.
Very good. Muhammad Yunus, exactly. So sometimes I ask and students don't know him, but there's always at least 1 or 2 who do. And thank you, Gloria. Yes, this is Muhammad Yunus. Do you want to tell us who he is?
He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner and the founder of Grameen Bank.
Yeah. Exactly. And what does the Grameen Bank do?
They pioneered the concept of microfinance in India by lending to the poorest of the poor.
Exactly. Well, in Bangladesh, he's actually originally from Bangladesh. So here you see him with his clients, his customers, and the first customers that he ever targeted were women. And he targeted women because in his country, as well as in many other countries, women tend to be even poorer. So they bear the burden of poverty. They have less access to jobs, less access to education, less access to credit. So he thought that if he targeted poor women in his society, he would be helping more people, because not only would he be helping them, he would also be helping their families and their children. And these are micro loans. So the microfinance model is you give out very small loans to aspiring entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs who, for instance, need to, buy material to make clothes and then sell them at the market. And with the money they make at the market by selling clothes, they can pay back the loan. And then with the loan and interest earned on the loan, the bank can give loans to more people, which leads to local development. So the Grameen Bank became very, very successful and actually was one of the pioneering microfinance institutions. And there are many more microfinance actors in the space, including emerging Hope Lanka from Sri Lanka that I just mentioned. And Muhammad Yunus became extremely famous. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, and he's gone around the world, lecturing about his model, and so many people have replicated it. And here, in terms of achieving the SDGs, reduced inequalities, no poverty, gender equality, and decent work and economic growth. So we're almost out of time, or we are out of time. So I just want to conclude. And just to conclude, aid and charity alone are not enough to address the problems of poverty and sustainability in the world, or to even achieve the sustainable development goals. Why are they not enough? Can anyone in the room tell me? Why is aid and charity not enough?
It's really hard to financially sustain without outside inputs.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you, Joey. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I said it's really hard to sustain without outside inputs.
Exactly. Okay, good. Exactly. So this aid and charity create dependency. And also the problem is sometimes the aid stops. Sometimes it's a bad year and, people won't necessarily be as generous. So this is not a necessarily sustainable model. It is an important one. And there's a very important role for foreign aid and charity. I actually teach a class on foreign aid, but it's not enough to address the problems of sustainability and poverty eradication. Governments alone are not enough. Why? Because they don't always have the willpower to make a difference and to provide these public goods, such as infrastructure, education, healthcare, bridges. They don't provide them sometimes because they don't have the resources. Sometimes they don't have the willpower, and sometimes they're corrupt. So there are different reasons why governments fall short and don't necessarily meet their responsibilities towards their citizens. The private sector, sorry, yeah, there was a question.
Even with the best of intentions, they're gone after 4 years, right? They get
That's
reelected.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. Very good comment, Glory. Even with good intentions, they, very short mandates. So then they're gone. And then who knows who will replace them? Sometimes somebody with not so good intentions. So they're not always enough, right? The private sector has incredible resources. They certainly have enough money to solve the problems of sustainability and poverty reduction, but they don't have the motive. They don't have the incentive because they have this profit incentive, and that is not always met in certain environments. And then social entrepreneurs are part of the solution. They alone will not be able to do it. They don't have the resources. They might have the intentions and not necessarily the resources. But at the end of the day, these actors, these different actors, the private sector, the social sector, governments, and social entrepreneurs together, multi-stakeholder engagement can solve the challenges of global poverty and sustainability. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed this very short lecture on social entrepreneurship and the SDGs. And it was a pleasure to share this information and this knowledge with you. And I really hope that our paths cross again. So feel free to reach out. Thank you. Have a great day or evening or morning, wherever you are. Thanks so much.